Good morning, everybody. We'll give it 1 minute. In the meantime, if you'd like to get your pages ready on your Humashim, we are having a double header this week, Matot and Mas'e. We are bringing the book of Bimidbar to a closing, and I'd like to discuss both those Parshiyot together as part of our finale for Sefer Bimidbar. So before we get started, I'd like to thank the children of Ruthie and Joey Towell. They sponsored the summer series of our classes together. Sarah and Jack Hadeya, Margot and Moses Hidary, Michael, Shaya, and Mariel Towell. Thank you very much. It's a beautiful way to honor your parents. Also, today's class is in loving memory of Yaakov ben Estel, Jack Hadeya Alav Hashalom, by his sister Carol Silvera. Thank you, Carol. We are going to be talking about Yaakov, our forefather, in this class, so hopefully this class will be Leilui Nishmato as well. So if you'll open your Humashim, if you're working out of the blue books, it's page 918. I'm starting in Mas'e, working our way back to Matot. And then, of course, it's best if you have a Tanakh, because we're going to end up also in Sefer Bereshit as well. So Mas'e, I'll just give you a second. So, Matot is going to start out with Nidarim, with vows that are made. And there are going to be a few elements that continue from there. But for today, I want to start here because I think it reflects a major theme that's taking place in Sefer Bimidbar. So let's just look at the beginning of Mas'e, and then we'll do a 1 arrow rewind, and then we'll do a 4 arrow rewind. Meaning, we're going to start at the beginning of Mas'e because that's going to take us on a trip down memory lane. It starts with Ele Mas'e B'nai Yisrael, and these are the journeys of B'nai Yisrael, Asher Yatz'u Me'eretz Mitzrayim, that had left Eretz Mitzrayim. So the Sefer is flanked beautifully that by the time we get to the end of Sefer Bimidbar, we're not forgetting what the starting point of our journey was. And so it's reminding us that we had left Mitzrayim, Letziv Otam, we left according to our groups, our tribal and military, specifically our military groups, and we had left in the hands of Moshe and Aharon. All of this is going to come to be important to us because both Moshe and Aharon's deaths are going to be highlighted in these Parshiyot that we're reading right now. So it's sort of highlighting for us now that we're coming in for a landing. We're coming into the end of an era. What was once begun as Moshe and Aharon bringing a people out of Mitzrayim, that is now going to become an entire new generation and movement as we go into the land. And it says Moshe wrote down all of their journeys. He kept a diary, he kept a journal, and there's 42 places that are going to be mentioned here. For the purposes of our class today, I'm not going to go through every one of the places that they traveled, but I believe that this recap is here because the Torah is looking to send us a message. It's sending us, our generation, a message, as much as it was sending the new generation that's on the cusp of the Jordan about to get into Eretz Yisrael. They are getting a message from this as well. And it just to give you the flavor of it so you can see how Moshe records it. He starts from the very beginning. The starting point is actually in Eretz Mitzrayim. They started out in Ramses and they went on the first day of the first month, on the 15th day. If this is not a memory lane, I don't know what is. There's the starting point is Leil HaSeder, is when the first night of Pesach, that Makat Bechorot, these are the memories that are being conjured up for us. And I think it's a very important message that Parashat Mas'e is starting with this whole recounting, so to speak. And it was on the 15th day of the first month that they left. They left Beyad Rama le'enei kol Mitzrayim. This is important for us. We already know. We read this in the book of Shemot. You're not telling me I don't already know anything I don't already know. None of this is news. But yet the Torah is going to go into tremendous detail. It's going to recount 42 of our pit stops that we made in the desert. And the names of these places are important. And what they symbolize is equally as important. So already we should start with what attitude did the people have when they left Egypt? And I'm sorry to be the one to have to bring this also and have to mention this part of it. But the people who are on page 918 in Parashat Mas'e that are being referenced here, we had a whole class about it when we started Sefer B'Midbar. These are not the same people that are going into the land of Israel. And yet their story, which you would be inclined to say is in the past, is old news. They are the been there, done that's of Sefer B'Midbar. They're still here, they're still alive and well, and we can't move into the land of Israel. This is, by the way, here. I know we still have a whole nother book of Devarim, but that whole book of Devarim takes place possibly on one day. It's literally the end of Moshe's life. Here, in this week, Moshe is being told, go up to Har Nevo, go look at the beautiful land. That's where you're going to be buried. This is it. As far as we're concerned, that journey ends here. Sefer Devarim is a recounting of Moshe's version of the story and what he has to tell humanity. It's man speaking to man. The whole book is given in the words of Moshe, how he's going to impart his experience of having spent time with the people and with Hashem for us to be able to move forward into the new land. So for us, we need to pay close attention to Parashat Mas'e. Parashat Mas'e is going to start to give us it's a guidebook of how to move forward and start a new beginning. And in order to start that new beginning, yes, we have our roots deeply seated in Ramses and how we went from Ramses to Sukkot. And I skipped this little piece, even verse 4, Mitzrayim, was, notice how sensitive and how vividly the Torah wants us to remember that Leil Shimurim, that night that God killed the firstborns and redeemed Bnei Israel. It's here, we're at the end of B'Midbar. This is something that should have been said in Shemot, but it's listed here to remind us. Mitzrayim mekabrim, they were busy burying Et asher hika Hashem bahem kol bechor. They were busy burying all their firstborns as God took their gods and took their idols and completely obliterated them. This is a vision. This is a visual that the Torah wants to give us. The emergence of Bnei Israel from Eretz Mitzrayim. They left, literally, the place was going up in flames. There were graves being dug everywhere. And this, from this womb, so to speak, this is where we were birthed as a nation. This is where we come out of. And it sort of puts the reader in this place, and I think the Torah wants us to see this. It puts us in this idyllic state where Moshe is our leader, Hashem is our God. We have nothing to go back to. Our clearest memory of Mitzrayim is we left it in ruins and they were having funerals over there. I'm painting this picture for you, not me. The Torah is painting this picture because it wants to tell us that plan A was for Moshe to be the guide, for Moshe to be the parent, for together Moshe and Hashem to provide all of our needs in the desert. And the original plan was that that nation was going to come into Eretz Yisrael. We know that that didn't happen. And it doesn't want us to forget that modality, that reality, where as we emerged as a nation and Hashem provided all our physical needs, meaning he gave us the man, he gave us the water, he gave us the clouds. He even said, Hashem yilachem lachem. Remember when they were standing at the edge of the river? Ve'atem tacharishun. I'm going to take care of everything for you. All your needs will be met. And for some reason, and we're going to have to analyze that reason, because we can't move forward into the land unless we put our finger on why didn't that relationship with Moshe and Hashem and the people, why wasn't that enough to bring those people into the land? Why am I now here in Parshiyot Mas'e, where none of those people, and the Torah is going to be very descriptive. It's going to say only Yehoshua and only Kalev are the ones from the earlier generation that are going to make it in. And the commentaries are very generous. They say also the women as well were invited into the land. They didn't participate in all of this stuff. So this enchanting story where we're being led out by God with clouds and fires and wings of eagles, if you'd like to say, this version of our leaving didn't actually have a fairy tale ending, unfortunately. And the Torah here in these pages, in these early verses in Parashat Mas'e, is going to name places. It's going to talk about Mara, for instance, in verse 8, which is, we know that we complained because the waters were bitter. We see Refidim in verse 14, for instance. Refidim is where we ended up. It was the beginning of the story of Amalek coming to attack us. And Kivrot HaTe'ava, where we said, oh, we wish we would have been buried in Egypt, where we ate beautiful meat and we had beautiful barbecues. All of these places are mentioned, but the actual events are not highlighted for us. It's left for the reader to recognize that the relationship that we did have with Hashem, that idyllic relationship where God took care of everything like a parent, right? A newborn. What does a parent do for a newborn? All of the newborn's needs are met. The identity of the child is one and the same with the parent. The problem here that we saw is that we were so completely enmeshed. We were so completely dependent. We didn't have our own identity outside that relationship, that what happens? We ended up not creating our own identity, and there's a growth process. And the process that the Torah is saying is, yes, after you come out of the womb and after you come out of Egypt, there needs to be a process of identity. There needs to be a place where we start to create our independence and where we start to do things for ourselves. And what happens is, unfortunately, when it comes to Moshe, unfortunately, and we see it very clearly with the golden calf, that would be a very good example. When Moshe is missing, when the parent figure is missing, they were so enmeshed, and this is a very strange dichotomy. On the one hand, they're so enmeshed with Moshe, Ha'ish Moshe, what happened to him? We don't know what happened. We're panicking. He's not back, and mommy didn't come back, daddy didn't come back, right? But then at the same time, what do? They completely alienate themselves, and they become completely estranged from Moshe in the same sentence. And they say, what? Let's get a new Moshe, and let's re-identify that Moshe. And of course, Moshe is a representation of God. So when I'm replacing Moshe, I'm also replacing God, and I'm going to say, Ele Elohecha Yisrael. And I have now, the Torah is being very clear to express to us in the maturity not just of the nation of Israel. As the nation of Israel is maturing, it's also speaking to the way we mature as human beings and how we go from stages of infancy and stages of dependence to independence. And it seems like the Bnei Israel in the desert that's not going to make it into the land, they was sort of, they only made it maybe to adolescence, where there's this part of them that's completely attached and dependent on the parent. But then there's that other part that says, who needs them anyway? Who needs Moshe? He's replaceable. And when I replace Hashem, when I replace Moshe, I'm replacing God. And the Torah is telling us that in order to go into Eretz Israel, there needs to be a new modality, a new leadership, a new relationship between the leader and its people. And unfortunately, since the people aren't going into the land, that first generation, neither is their leader. The people that we're going to see now on the next few pages are actually going to be Yehoshua. He is going to be the military force, the political force, so to speak. And we're going to see Elazar. Elazar is the son of Aharon HaKohen. His son was Pinchas from last week, remember? So the new leaders, Elazar and Yehoshua, are going to have to bring to the table, going to bring to us, to highlight for us, to explain to us, what is it? What are the dynamics that need to happen between a leader and his people, or actually between the people and themselves, in order to be worthy of charting a new course and starting a new beginning? And so with this introduction, I'd like to take you now, if you will, please, just go back a few pages. We're just going to do a small rewind into Parashat Matot. I'd like you to go to page 910 if you're in the Blue Chumashim. It's chapter 32 in the book of Bimidbar, right at the very beginning. And I want you to see what starts to happen. These are all parts of an emergence of a people. And I had entitled the class Respecting Boundaries, because we're going to see that in these Parshiyot, there's going to be a lot of talk about borders and a lot of talk about boundaries, and we need to know what they mean for us as a community or as a nation here, as tribes, each one having their own borders and their own boundaries, and then of course within ourselves, the boundaries that we create ourselves. So I want you to first see how it's presented here with Reuven and Gad. It starts out with them, and later on half of Shevet Menashe joins. But for the beginning, these two tribes, Reuven and Gad, it starts by telling us that they have a lot of mikneh, a lot of kinyan, a lot of property, a lot of owning of stuff. And it turns out that they're going to tell us that the mikneh is specifically cattle and livestock. So mikneh Rav haya livnei Reuven ulivnei Gad. Reuven and Gad have much mikneh. Atzum me'od, exceedingly abundant, exceedingly strong with all of this livestock. And what do? They see these lands, and they see that it's a very conducive place for grazing mikneh. So in verse 2, Bnei Gad and Bnei Reuven come to Moshe, and they come to Elazar HaKohen, and they come to the leaders, and they say, these cities, these places that Bnei Israel has already conquered, hint, hint, happens to be a land that has a lot of grazing opportunities for our cattle. And then you'll notice something very interesting. It looks like a parasha setuma. There are spaces between, there should be no space this. It could be even like a pesika, like a space be'en psa, in the middle of the parshiyah, because verse 5 continues on the same subject. Verse 5 says, it seems like there was a pause. It seems like, let's just take a minute and see, why would the text put a space in the middle of this conversation? And it seems as if they're sort of testing the waters with Moshe. They're saying, this land that we came to happens to be fantastic for grazing sheep. What do you think of that? They leave it open. Maybe on the best case scenario, they're hoping that Moshe is going to say, hey, you guys have a lot of sheep, and here there's a lot of land. It's a perfect match. Why don't you just stay on this side? But of course, Moshe is silent, and they don't know how to read his silence. They don't know what to do. So they keep talking. They fill the silence themselves. They fill that pasika, that quiet space themselves, and they say, and now notice their tone. They're going to make their request, but they start imatzanu chen be'einecha. They're literally tippy-toeing towards Moshe. They want to make sure that they don't set off any alarms. If we find favor in your eyes, please give us this land. They call themselves avadecha. They're putting themselves in a subservient place. Give it to us as an achuzah. Let us own this. Let this be an inheritance for us, or a holding for us, and we won't. Don't cross us over the Jordan. All Moshe needs to hear is that they're going to stay on this side of the Jordan, and he goes not so happy. He says to Bnei Gad and Reuven, says, what are you talking about? Your brothers are going to go to war, ve'atem tishvu po, and you're going to sit here? Why would you even take the hearts of, dissuade the people? Why would you give them reason to second guess this movement into Eretz Israel? Don't you know that this was done already? Remember when I sent those spies from Kadesh Barnea to see the land? And remember when they went to see the grapes and they saw the land, and they gave back report, and they dissuaded the people by saying, Levilti bo el ha'aretz. It's not a good idea to go to the land that Hashem had given them. And he gets angry. Vayichad af Hashem. No, excuse me. Moshe is still telling the story of what happened with the spies, that Hashem got very angry on that day. And he swore and he said, anybody from age 20 and up is not going to go into the land that I promised to Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, because they didn't follow after me. And then again here, we had discussed this early in our introduction. The only two are Kalev and Yehoshua, because they did follow Hashem fully. And Hashem got angry with Israel, and this is why you're here for 40 years. So what Moshe is really saying, please don't let this be a here we go again moment, where just because the spy scenario took place just before they were about to enter the land. So now you're doing the same thing. So don't do that. Don't go there, so to speak, says Moshe. And they came and they said in verse 16, they said, Gidrot son, we will build, what do you call those, corrals for our mikneh, and we will build cities for our children. But let me tell you this, Moshe, our plan isn't to sit here relaxing while everybody else is fighting to conquer the land. No, that's not our plan. We are going to go in the forefront and fight for the people to get their land. And ki lo ninchal itam, we're not going to inherit with them on the other side of the Yarden, but we're not going to take our nachala, we're not going to receive or accept our portion here on this side of the Jordan River until everybody has already gotten and secured their land in Eretz Israel. So basically, what these tribes are saying is, we don't intend on inheriting this land that was already secured, that was already fought for, that already has the Israeli flag hanging on it, and let them fend for themselves. Not at all. If anything, we're going to fight in the front lines. And once and only once everybody in Eretz Israel has their land, then we will come and take our portion here. And at the top, just for the sake of time, in verse 28, Vayitzav lahem Moshe. Moshe, first of all, agrees to this condition. He says, everything that you're hayotze mipichem ta'asu. Remember those words, because they're the same words that are used in the beginning of Parashat Matot. Anything that comes from your mouth, it's part of the language that's used to describe the nedarim. It's sort of like they're making a neder, and we have to talk about that as well. He says, everything that comes out of your mouth, do. He actually clarifies it for them. He says, don't put your mikneh before your children. Don't build corrals for your animals and cities for your children. Make sure that when you do settle this land, that the children come first. Make sure tapenu, nashenu, miknenu. Make sure that the order is going to be first tapechem and then tzonechem. First come the children. The education and the raising of your children should not be superseded by the acquisition of all of your wealth. It's a very famous place where, the rabbis or spiritual leaders or guidance counselors will say, just make sure you have your priorities straight, and make sure, Rabbi Russ used to always say, nobody ever says on their deathbed, I wish I spent more time at the office. It's usually, I wish I spent more time with my children and my family. And Moshe is sending this message to them as well. And it's a little bit hard for us to hear, because Moshe, whenever he speaks, he's speaking from a place of knowledge, from a place of experience. And he, as a leader, had to compromise possibly some of the time that he spent with his own wife and his own children. We know that they come to him when Yitro brings them. So he's saying, don't make those mistakes. Make sure you make your children a priority. And then he goes on to say, for our purposes today, in verse 28, he says, Vayitzav lahem Moshe, and Moshe commands them. And who does he put in charge that will oversee that the suggestion or the condition is met? The condition that the two tribes are not going to inherit on the other side of the Yarden until everybody has their portion. So he puts Elazar HaKohen and Yehoshua bin Nun as the heads of the commission to make sure that this is going to take place. And I think that this is very important. This is the way that Moshe is saying, you're not going to be like the spies. You're not going to, because Yehoshua is the one upholding the anti-spies, anti-tarim, the anti-mission, the idea that there's going to be a separation with the brothers. You see, with the spy mission, there was 10 spies on one side and 2 spies on the other side. Here, there's 10 tribes on one side and 2 tribes on the other side. Yehoshua is saying, as is Elazar, this is not a repeat of the spy story where we have the 10 and 2. We're going to be here to ensure that by fighting as one, by coming together and wearing army uniforms and fighting in the forefront with your brothers, there is not a separation like there was the 10 and 2 with the spies. This is one unit. And part of this is the Torah's way to tell us that there will be borders and there will be boundaries and there will be members of families living on other sides of bodies of water. But if you want to move forward, you can still have a physical separation that is healthy as long as there's an emotional attachment. I will tell you, I have a sister who lives in Mexico, and I am closer to her than many people are to siblings that live next door to each other. Because if you keep an emotional attachment, if you're constantly in touch with them, if you realize that space doesn't have to compromise unity or the understanding that we're all one, then this Torah is telling us, yes, you can have two brothers, which is going to be 2.5 brothers, who are going to live on the other side. You're going to have a natural geographic boundary. You're going to have a body of water that's actually going to separate you. But don't look as this boundary, and we're going to talk a lot about boundaries soon. Don't look at this idea of boundaries as being separate. We put up boundaries, we put up walls, right? We say good fences make good neighbors. We do have the need to have boundaries, but rather than see a boundary as something that conveys the idea of keeping yourself separate, I think the Torah wants to tell us that boundaries are actually connecting points. You can see the boundary as something which separates us, or you can see that boundary as something that connects us. And just practically speaking, in relationships, for instance, if there are no boundaries, if it's just a free-for-all, what ends up happening is that those relationships end up being way more compromised than the relationships that do have boundaries. The relationship that protects the integrity and the entity of each side, of each party. So boundaries, according to the Torah, can absolutely provide healthy rules and healthy ways for navigating healthy relationships. They protect relationships. And I think that's what the Torah is telling us. And Moshe, what is Moshe saying? His own experience. Did he put boundaries? Did he separate from himself from the people? Was he his own entity? Did he have his own private place, his own private space? Or were there no boundaries with Moshe and the people? And sometimes, in some cases where there were no boundaries, that's where it actually became much more unhealthy. I'll use that word. Now we can go to one more arrow of our rewind. We could start in the beginning of Parashat Matot. And I think the beginning of Parashat Matot is going to speak to this idea that is being conveyed. It's permeating throughout Sefer Bimidbar. It's the finale of Sefer Bimidbar. But this idea of where do I end and where does something else start? Do I lose myself completely, whether I'm a tribe, whether I'm a mother, whatever it is that I am, however I identify myself, there needs to be a siyag, there needs to be a fence, there needs to be something. I'll just use this example, the human body, the way God created our cells, for instance. Our cells have membranes. And those membranes decide what's going to come in and what's going to go out, and how much of themselves is going to be integrated and how much of themselves is going to remain intact. These ideas, the way the human being was created, the nucleus of the human being is not going to be much different than the nucleus of the tribe. That's not going to be much different than the land of Israel itself. Because we're going to see when we go all the way back to Parashat Mas'e, it's going to end with the borders and the boundaries of Bnei Israel. And all of these are important factors to being able to emerge as this new healthy nation. So let's take the neder in the context of this idea of boundaries. So we're going to start off, it's on page 900, but it's in chapter 30, verse 2, is where Parashat Matot starts in Sefer Bimidbar. Moshe speaks to the heads, Rashi Hamatot Livnei Israel. The word Mateh, we know it means a staff. It also means a tribe. So he's speaking to the heads of the tribe, which is a beautiful way to describe them because every head of the tribe had a special staff identifying it. And he says, Zeh hadavar, this is the big davar, the big thing that God has commanded. It's quite the drum roll. If we only were studying Parashat Mas'e and we were Matot, and we were only studying about Nedarim, I would spend a lot of time saying, this is a big drum roll of all the Devarim, of all the diburim, of all the speech, and of all the things that God had to tell Moshe, that Moshe had to tell the people, Moshe is giving this one a very big intro by saying, Ze hadavar, this is it. This is the thing that God has commanded. I'm expecting Shabbat. I don't know what to expect here. I was not expecting this. Ish ki yidor neder laHashem. If a man is to make a neder to God, or which is a vow, or he would to swear a swear, he shava shivua. And of course, please notice that the way a neder is written is lashon nofela lashon, yidor neder. The language is tripping over itself. It's redundant. It could just say ish ki yidor if a man were to vow. It doesn't have to say if a man were to vow a vow. What else would you vow other than a neder? So again, the language here is extraneous because I believe when you see double language like this, it's speaking to the past. It's speaking to the future. It's saying that the verb itself is now exploding. It's transcending its time. It's no longer bound by the present of when this was written, but it's speaking to past and future. And I'm smiling because we're going to talk about past nidarim as well, and I think that's a very important thing that the Torah wants us to have in mind. Or hishava shivua, or to swear a swear. Notice now we have the trifecta. Le'esor isar al nafsho. An isur, something's not allowed. It's called asur, right? Asur means literally to bind oneself. It means like to imprison. Le'esor isur. I didn't even finish the pasuk. Al nafsho. When a person opens their mouth, they're imprisoning their soul. That's a holy moly. That's a big deal. When you open your mouth, you're imprisoning your soul. Lo yachel devaro. Make sure you don't desecrate what you say. And then we have the words that we had just seen before. Kol hayotze mipiv ya'aseh. Everything that comes out of your mouth must be fulfilled. And these words are the words that describe the two tribes that Moshe said, everything that comes out of your mouth, you must fulfill as well. And this is how we're going to start connecting. All this is one sort of unbroken strand. So if this was just a neder class, we would say, be very careful what you say, be careful what comes out of your mouth. God created the world through speech, and through speech we create realities. And because he created us in his image, when we speak, we have the ability to bring things into realities, into being, into existence. So when we say things, we must fulfill them. It's as if they are already being fulfilled just from the fact that we said it. And so this is some serious stuff. I'm going to first talk about the Isha, and then I'll talk about the psychology behind what causes a person to make a neder in the first place, and why it is that the Torah basically frowns upon taking vows. We already see that if you take a vow, it's like you're putting yourself literally behind bars. You're literally creating a boundary between yourself and something else. That's a neder, is you're putting walls up, which is pretty serious stuff. So I'm going to tell you about the Isha part, because that might bring a little comfort to some of us. The Isha ki tidor neder, and if a woman were to make a neder to Hashem, ve'asra isar, she's also imprisoning herself, so to speak. Bevet aviha, and then the laws of the Isha who would happen to make a neder is if her father heard her neder, he is allowed to hecherishla. He is allowed to annul her vow. If he is quiet, hecherishla, if he doesn't say anything, then her neder stands. And they use that same status for a wife and for her husband. If a woman were to say something, and some of the commentaries say that the women are so much more emotional, so they are able to get this out, so to speak. They're able to have their vow annulled. But as far as the men are concerned, it's not really giving an out for the man who makes a vow. And so all of this puts us into a question of, first of all, why are you talking about vows in Parashat Matot? We're on a roll here. We're talking about, we had just finished at the end of Parashat Pinchas. We spoke about the holidays, the laws that are going to be kept in the land. Why are you going back to vows? What do vows have to do with us, with our story? And if we'll remember, and we had said we're learning Lilui Nishmat Yaakov ben Estel as well, so I want to bring up the Yaakov scenario. Yaakov is going to make his way back to Eretz Yisrael too. If you'll remember, he was staying in Lavan's house, and God had to remind him, and God had to say, Yaakov, you made a neder. It's time for you to fulfill your neder. Vayidor Yaakov neder. And he had made a swear, he had made a promise that if God gave him a coat to wear and food to eat, that he would return back. You remember that whole story. And he would build a monument for God in the place that he had seen him. All of this is part of our national story. The same way Yaakov needs to get back into Eretz Yisrael by fulfilling his vows, by keeping his words, so too the Torah is saying, if anybody makes any kind of a neder, until they are either fulfill it or free of it, they can't move forward. They're going to be stuck. They're going to be trapped. Worse, they're going to be in the midbar. They're going to be in a no man's land. They're going to be in a place that is very, very unhealthy. And so I'd like you to see, I'm just going to take 1 minute here. If I could find it quickly enough. Okay. It happens to be, if anybody's looking for it, it's in chapter 28 of Bereshit. Vayidor Yaakov neder. And he said, if you will watch me in my travels, and you will give me lechem le'echol, and you will give me a beged lilbosh, then what is his neder specifically? His neder specifically is, and this is the neder that we need to have as people. If you're looking in the blue books, it's page 146, and I'm in verse 21 now of chapter 28 in Bereshit. When he says, Veshavti beshalom el bet avi, this is the Jewish people. I want you at the same time to envision Yaakov returning to his land together with the Jewish nation returning to their land, to the land of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So this land that they're both parallel returning to, Yaakov had said in his neder, Veshavti beshalom el bet avi, when I return to the house of my father, Vehaya Hashem li le'elohim. We all remember the part that Yaakov promised that he would take the matzeva, the stone, and turn it into a house of God. That part we all remember. We can't forget this little part that is spoken before that. Before we build a house for God, the first thing that has to happen is Vehaya Hashem li Elohim. We must accept upon ourselves that God is going to be our Elohim, our divine leader, that he's going to be our God. Moshe is telling the people here, Zeh hadavar, this is the thing that Hashem commanded. We need to go into Eretz Yisrael doing a million things at once. The multitasking, it's a multi-emotional tasking. We have to see ourselves as Yaakov, who's coming back and rededicating God as his God, which is what's being asked of us here in the desert. And it's using the language of nedarim. And I want to talk a little bit about nedarim. What is a neder? A neder is a verbal expression. It's something that we say with our mouth. It's a symbolic language, so to speak. And Aviva Zornberg says it beautifully. I hope I don't botch how she had said it. She says something along the lines of, it's a very perilous place between the mouth and the hand, between what we say and what we actually do. And I found that to be a very, very profound statement, because there is a space. This vow that we make is that space between the language that we speak and the actualization of something. And speech is what makes us godly. Abra kedabra, I create as I speak. God created, we had said, through his speech. That's what brings about creation. And we have all these words of the actions speak louder than words. And what do those things really mean? It means that I may not be strong enough to bring this reality to being just with the use of my hands. So I need to also make a statement, make an oral declaration, and maybe together with what my mouth says and with what my hands do, maybe with those two energies at work, I can get to this place. I could create this new reality. And hopefully those of you who know me well enough know that I'm pointing us in a very specific direction. A neder, which is going to combine what my mouth says with what my hands do. Anybody? Hakol kol Yaakov. Hayadayim yede Esav. And we may have processed this. This is what Yitzchak says when he finally does give the blessing to Yaakov. It's what convinces him, because of Yaakov's voice, even though his yadayim are the hands of Esav, but because it's the voice of Yaakov, he gives him the blessing. But we can't forget specifically what God had told Rivka. God had told Rivka, Le'om mile'om ye'ematz. Remember, Shnei goyim bebitnech u'shnei le'umim mime'ayich yeparedun. Remember? And when God had spoken to Rivka, the ideal wasn't for these brothers to be separate. The ideal was for them to get together, for the hand and the mouth, for both of those to work in tandem. Now, what we know about Esav was that Esav had no boundaries. The guy was he was out there. He was the poster boy for the uncontrolled, no boundaries, loose, undefined. You couldn't contain Esav. He was larger than life, and he was just completely an external being. Yaakov, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Yaakov, he was an Ish Tam. He was a Yoshev Halim. He had clearly defined borders. What's so beautiful is the blessing that God gave Rivka. And he said, neither one of those modalities is the ideal. Staying inside your tent like Yaakov and enclosed and confined in your boundaries, that's not the ideal. Being the Esav who's out there undefined and uncontrolled, that's not the ideal either. We need to have a combination of those two to have a healthy entity. And here, going into the land, what's God telling Moshe, or Moshe telling the people? As brothers, there are 12 of you, 13 tribes, if you will. And the way that you're going to reach your greatest potentials and your greatest selves is not by having zero boundaries and a free-for-all. And it's also not by everybody encapsulating themselves. It's going to have this idea of balance. and what's being told about the tribes and the land is also being spoken to for us. Zehadavar, every single individual, every single person has to also have this sense of self within themselves. We have to be able, like we said, on a molecular level, on the smallest level within inside of us, we have to, and this happens automatically. We did a lot of lower brain, upper brain talk in the past in our earlier classes. All of this lower brain stuff, this is part of that. This is the stuff that takes place automatically. There's not so much, we don't put any thought into what the membranes of our cells are or letting in and letting out. It's not something that we do, that we have a cognizance of. But we should know that that's the way that God created us, the human body, on the most microscopic level. We were meant to create, to have membranes. Maybe that's the best word that I could think of. I wasn't a great science student. I should have paid closer attention if I knew how much it would help me to understand the concepts of how God designed us. And this idea that we were designed with letting in the good and allowing for the waste to go out. That is the boundary that we have on the smallest level. And now God's telling us, you're going into the land of Egypt, into the land of Israel. Going into the land of Israel, you're going to have to make those decisions. We're not in the same modality that we were in when Moshe told you what to eat, when to sleep, what to do. Everything was taken care of you. You didn't have any choices. You didn't have any decisions to make. Now you're going to become your own gatekeepers. On a national level, we're talking a lot of important things. We're talking morality. We're talking values. We're talking what type of people are we going to allow to assimilate into our country. Are we going to put up walls? Are we going to put up borders? Are we going to have conditions that need to be met before people are allowed to become citizens and live amongst us and our children and influence and affect them? On so many levels, the Torah is speaking to this. It starts with ourselves. What am I allowing? Ad kan, ad po. Where do I put my boundaries? How much of myself am I going to allow to be permeated? And we have to always be careful, as Moshe is telling us, you can't be that permeable where you lose your own sense of self. So this is just the foundation for what's being expected moving into the new land. Now, the Torah and Moshe also, he's very, very honest. And what I love about Moshe and how he describes his life story is very often when things go awry, like we read in Parshiyot Mas'e, we have 42 places and that many or more problems and struggles and trials and tribulations and challenges and uprisings. I don't have to tell you what took place in Sefer Bamidbar. You read it yourselves already. But very often we like to think that those problems were caused by other people, that other people did things, that other people breached our boundaries, that other people were invaders, that other people came and created scenarios that led to a lot of the traumas that we ended up undergoing. And it's so much easier for us to put all this blame on other people instead of admitting that they could do, the famous Viktor Frankl, right? I can't control what other people do to me, but I can control how I react. Of course, he said it way more eloquently, but that's the basic idea of it. Moshe is trying to say, now moving forward, guys, you're the ones in charge. You're the ones who are calling the shots. You're the ones who are going to be held accountable. And don't play the blame game, because at the end of the day, Hashem knows that you're the ones who make the ultimate decisions. There was a beautiful, I don't know how many of you, I'm showing my age now, how many of you remember Dear Abby, Ann Landers? She had a beautiful article one time she posted, and I thought it was so, so clever. She wrote in to herself, and she was posing as this woman, and I don't remember exactly what she said, but the idea was she had said, "Dear Abby, can you help me?" She said, "A very weird thing happened. A strange old lady moved into my house." Does anybody remember it? She says, "I have no idea who she is or where she came from or how she even got into my house. All I know is that she just showed up one day, and she's very, very clever. For the most part, she manages to keep out of sight. But whenever I pass a mirror, I catch a glimpse of her. And there she is, hogging up the whole mirror, and she's completely obliterating my gorgeous body and my gorgeous face, because she just keeps jumping in front of the mirror. And she does it in such a clever way. And she says, I try screaming at her, but she screams back. And she must really have a sweet tooth, but she's really packing on the pounds. She better be careful." Of course, we know she's speaking of her own self, but the way dear Abby puts it, she's sort of saying, we can't sometimes recognize and see our own selves. It's so much easier to see that the one that's packing on the pounds or the one that's getting the wrinkles. I mean, those are the examples that she uses. She says, she's tampering with my scale. It's so much easier to put the blame outside ourselves. It's so much easier to not truly see ourselves with our added pounds, with our wrinkles, with all of our flaws. It's so much easier, and that's a human condition. And that's why I love that dear Abby, who speaks about the human condition. You can learn things from everybody anywhere. But what she was really saying is that sometimes you have to take a long, hard look in the mirror, and you have to accept that that person actually is you. And when things go on, when you're moving into a new existence, when you're moving out of the desert, when you're moving into Eretz Yisrael, it's much easier to deal with an external problem. It's much easier to think that the problem is outside of you. And Moshe is saying, no, the issues that we had all along in the desert was inside every one of us, myself included. There's nobody more humble than Moshe. There's nobody who's the first to say, because of my shortcomings. And it becomes a little bit, what's the word? Your heart breaks when you hear this, because he realizes that not only aren't they the ones fit to come into the land, but maybe he's not the one fit to take the new people into the land. And it's look, we're back. I want to maybe close the idea with this setting limits. It's very easy to set limits for other people because we're responsible to those other people. But it's very hard when we set limits for ourselves because we're responsible for ourselves. And when those limits that we set for ourselves, whatever it is that we feel we need to, why are we setting limits? Because we want to get back to a balanced state. So when other people don't respect our boundaries, that we could react to. But what if we're the person that isn't respecting our own boundaries? These are things that the Torah wants us to think about. The Torah wants us to understand that, you know something, stop viewing yourself just as an innocent victim. You do have the ability to change. And I'd like to end with this idea because I think it takes us all the way back to the very beginning of the creation of humanity. And from the very beginning, it's God telling us that every day we have the ability to recreate ourselves. And what does that mean? It says, instead of doing like Chava had done, what did Chava do? Instead of seeking God, she wanted to be God. She wanted to play the role of God. And because she was so enthralled with the idea that on the day that you eat from the tree, vehitem kelohim, that you will be like God. Stop trying to be like God, unless being like God means that you're creating yourselves every day. Don't be like God in the sense that you want to be in control, that you want to determine tovera. Remember that etz that was, you want to determine what's right and what's wrong. We have to sometimes submit to a higher authority. That's Parashat Matot. That's Moshe telling Bnei Israel to get into the land, you need to keep the neder. Not just yours, but the one that Yaakov made, where God is going to be the higher authority. All of these ideas come together, all of these ideas enmesh, and I'll conclude with the end of Parashat Mas'e, where in Parashat Mas'e, the borders of the land of Israel are described. The idea that Moshe is going to go up to Har Nevo, and there's a big mystery surrounding Moshe's burial place. Some people say he was literally buried in Moab. Some commentaries say that that land was actually part of Eretz Yisrael proper at that time. The boundaries of Eretz Yisrael, any Torah scholar will tell you that there are many variations and versions of the boundaries of Eretz Yisrael. And why is that so beautiful for us? Because the same way that the land shows its flexibility, the way the land sometimes expands and sometimes contracts, it is a clear parallel for us. It's a clear parallel, for the Jewish people, that sometimes we have to embrace and we have to expand and we have to bring in more. And sometimes we have to contract and we have to tighten it up and we have to keep what's integral on the inside and we have to protect it from everything else on the outside. And the same holds true for human beings, for us as well. We have to develop this muscle called flexibility. It doesn't mean just because you set a boundary and just because you put up a wall or just because you decided that this was your limit, it doesn't mean that that's your limit for all time. We need to be flexible beings where sometimes we expand and sometimes we contract, And in doing this, we will be most like what Moshe is telling the people to be. We will be like those people who are keeping the neder of making Hashem our God, because Hashem himself is expanding and contracting. He did it from the beginning of creation. He took up the whole world with his presence and he made all those fences, and then he contracted and he allowed man to survive in his world. All of these boundaries, borders, call them what you will, they're all a lesson for us to find a sense of balance, to find a sense of equilibrium, to find the healthy relationship where we don't lose our identity, where we do have our own, we're at times we're in the ohel, and at times we are out there and in the world. We need to get to this place, and it's something that's changing every day. It's evolutionary. It didn't stop in Bereshit. It didn't stop with Yaakov. It didn't stop in the desert. It didn't stop when we got to the land. This idea of flexibility, of being able to protect and move and alter and amend the boundaries that we create for ourselves, for our religion, for our nation, for our country, those need to be flexible and keeping at the center the integrity that the one thing that isn't flexible is that Hashem is going to be our God and he is the higher authority, and that's what we're going to use to guide our decisions. And the Mas'e, the travels, is all part of taking all of this learning, all of the commandments, all of the Torah, all of the teachings of Moshe, taking that into the land. And what's beautiful, and I'll end with this, is it's ever changing. Every day there are new amendments being made to the oral law, to the written. The halachot are constantly being molded to allow man v'chai bahem, to allow man to live and to prosper and to be healthy and to be unified, yet to have an identity, boundaries, together with a sense of openness. All of this, I believe, is being highlighted here in Sefer B'Midbar. Chazak, chazak, v'nitchazek. Thank you for taking this journey with me, for enjoying Sefer B'Midbar together. And God willing, next week we will open a new book, Sefer Devarim, and see what we could glean from there. Have a great day, everybody. I keep forgetting, so I will check the chat right now and see. Thank you, everybody. Have a great week as well. And your comments are all very beautiful. Thank you for finding the, for posting the Perek. If anybody has any questions, I'm here. And have a great day. Feel free to unmute yourselves.
Okay.
Thanks, Vivien.
Thank you so much. Great class. Thank you.
Hi, Joelle. I miss you. I love your background.
I miss Wait and see. You'll see better backgrounds.
Inshallah. I look forward to that. Thank you.
Vivien, I have a question.
Yes.
You said about the halachot that they being changed to the time of that we're living in. Is that what you meant?
I mean that the halakha, yes, the halakha needs to be constantly revisited. We never had electricity before. We never had a pandemic. Every time that that our lives fall into uncharted territories, we can't say you must go to shul and pray in a minyan. That would be a good example. So what happens is we have to amend the laws, v'chai bahem, so we could keep the people safe, so we could keep the people healthy. So Torah has flexibility even within its, I'll give you a better example, Pesach. Everybody had their own seder by itself. The Torah says, Hu ubeto, hakarov el beto. The seder is supposed to be the entire family, the neighbors, kehalach ma'anya, bringing in all the poor people. And now the rabbi said, don't bring in anybody to your house. Keep it sterile. Keep yourself healthy. So what I mean by that is that we need to constantly be revisiting and be flexible enough so that the Torah is able to be a guiding light for us and move forward with us in any arena that we find ourselves.
All right, but there's a danger of like going with the times on many other subjects that would be dangerous to follow what's going on around in the world. It's
okay,
like
so that's why we have to, you're right, that's why we say the guiding light is God. He is the higher authority, and he has, whether it's Yehoshua and Elazar to make the decisions, or the Sanhedrin, or the rabbinate today. These decisions are not decisions that we're often able to take on our own, but the flexibility is in the Torah for the people who are enacting and are making these accommodations, maybe I should call them, so that we could keep the laws, but also move forward, whether it's with technology or in the medical field, with whatever it is. Every day there's new things coming out. You know, can you donate a kidney? Because all things that are happening constantly, the Torah has a flexibility about it to be able to adapt to all times. And I think the flexibility comes from the idea that borders and boundaries don't need to be set in stone. There needs to always be some degree of flexibility. Now, we can move our own boundaries, but you and I can't move boundaries that were made in halakha or in Torah. That's for those governing bodies to take care of that for us. That's way above my pay grade.
All right. Thanks, Vivien.
You got it.
Okay.
Nice seeing everybody. Have a
Bye.
beautiful day. Take care.